6:42 a.m. Thin sunlight spilled through the factory windows, landing on the steam rising from the leather press. The sewing machines hummed steadily, like the heartbeat of an old, loyal creature. The air carried a mix of tanned leather, cold coffee, machine oil, and a hint of burnt plastic. A harsh smell to newcomers, but to me, it was the scent of honest work. I stood beside the cutting table, fingers brushing across a piece of amber leather, feeling its warmth and tension. Some people start their mornings with meditation, I muttered, drawing the first clean cut. I start mine praying the steamer doesn't explode because someone unplugged it to charge their phone. In this workshop, every machine had its own personality. The sewing machine grumbled, the steamer sulked, and the dryer, if you didn't pat it first, would burn everything out of spite. For 20 years, I'd kept them all alive. No titles, no praise, and of course, not a single raise. The last time they reviewed my pay was when flip phones were still a thing. I guess loyalty doesn't come with an inflation rate. Luis appeared from the back, carrying a stack of freshly molded soles, glue still streaking his face. "Morning, boss. You're early today. I'm always earlier than the next disaster," I said. He chuckled, nodding. Classic Ava. The silent backbone. I laughed too. People only call you the backbone when they're about to find a new skeleton to replace you. I watched the line of stitches he was making, slightly off. I adjusted the pedal gently. "Listen to the needle, Luis. It's like jazz. Offbeat is fine, but out of rhythm ruins everything." He laughed. "You're weird, you know that?" I shrugged. "The good ones usually are." The office door swung open. A young marketing girl, curls perfectly styled, holding a latte the size of a pitcher, called through the mic, "Can we tone down the sewing noise? We're trying to film a live stream for the brand." I glanced at Luis and whispered, "Sure. Maybe we can turn off our heartbeats while we're at it. Keep the audio clean." He nearly choked laughing. I walked down the aisle of old molds, my hand grazing the faded labels, written in my own slanted handwriting from 2005, yellowed now, with time. Every label, every scratch told a story. Just like me, worn, but still standing. In the corner sat my father's old silver cassette radio. I turned it on. Miles Davis drifted out, warped but warm. Luis asked, "Is that your dad's?" I nodded. He used to fix shoes for everyone in the neighborhood. He'd always tell this awful joke. "You can tell a man's soul by the shoes he wears." Luis snorted. "That's terrible," I smiled. "True, though." Morning light poured across the benches, glinting off rows of half-finished shoes like memories still breathing. A notification blinked on my phone. Company-wide meeting, culture and modernization. I sighed. In corporate language, modernization usually means someone who actually knows what they're doing is about to get laid off. I turned Miles up a little louder, letting his trumpet drown out whatever hope was left in me. 20 years, I've kept this place alive," I whispered. "And somehow they forgot it once had a soul. Maybe they forgot the person who kept its rhythm too. The sewing machines kept running, the steam kept rising, the sunlight still kissed the leather, and somewhere deep inside me, a quiet crack finally began to open. Monday, 9 in the morning. The conference room was blinding under the new LED lights, white, cold, stripped of any soul. On the giant screen flashed the slogan, "Rebrand the Future." I sat in the back row, holding my old leather notebook, watching the woman at the podium. Clara Weston, 32, the new CEO, daughter of the founder. Her voice was bright, confident, and marinated in buzzwords: future, innovation, AI, sustainable growth. The kind of words people use when they've run out of real ideas. "We'll preserve the soul of craftsmanship," Clara said, flashing her polished smile, "but we'll automate the hands." Applause filled the room. I took a sip of coffee and muttered just loud enough for Luis to hear. "Sounds like keeping the flavor of the soup, but throwing out the pot." Luis bit his lip, trying not to laugh. Clara raised a hand to introduce Ethan Cole, her boyfriend and their new tech consultant. White shirt, Italian shoes, startup haircut. "We'll modernize production," he said smoothly. "No more dependence on manual labor. No more human limitations. Listening to us felt like hearing a cooking lecture from someone who's never touched a pan. I asked calmly, "What happens if the power goes out?" "We have a backup system," he replied. "Nice," I nodded. "I used to be the backup system. 20 years straight." He didn't get it. They rarely do. After the meeting, Clara walked through the workshop. The smell of leather rose in the humid air, fogging the glass walls. She wrinkled her nose. "This smell, it's too old. We'll make the space fresher once we renovate." I replied softly without looking up. "That's the smell of real, not the smell of PowerPoint slides." She smiled thinly and walked off with Ethan. Luis glanced at me, face flushed with anger. "Don't bother," I said quietly. "They can smell perfume better than effort." That afternoon, they hung a giant poster in the hallway. Weston, where tradition meets technology. A robotic arm holding a piece of leather. Shiny, soulless. I looked at it for a long time, then chuckled. "Robots don't have fingerprints," I said to Luis. "Or accountability." He gave a sad smile. "They're cutting staff soon, calling it restructuring." "Restructuring, huh?" I said. "That's just code for throwing someone overboard so the ship feels lighter." I knew Clara's type. The innovation generation loved to talk about legacy, but they'd never actually touched anything real. Her father once shook my hand with glue still on his fingers and said, "This company survives because of people like you." Now his daughter looks at me like a museum relic. She doesn't know. I was promised a raise back in 2019. When the company stabilizes, they said, they have opened 2 more factories since then. My pay stayed exactly where it was, like the old nameplate glued to the workshop door. But I stayed, not for the money. I stayed because I couldn't stand to see what I built crumble in someone else's hands. I didn't stay for them. I stayed because the craft still breathed. By Tuesday, Clara had cameras installed. Smart monitoring, she called it. A safety improvement, she said. I knew it was a way to count how long someone spent drinking water past 5 minutes. Before I left that evening, I placed a pair of real leather gloves on her desk. Brown, hand-stitched, soft and warm, like memory. With a small note attached, 100% handcrafted, cannot be reprogrammed. The next morning, the gloves were still there, unopened. That night, the workshop was quiet. The machines are off. Only the smell of leather and warm steam lingered. I sat at the table, listening to the faint jazz from my father's old silver cassette, Miles Davis, Blue and Green. I remembered his hands, rough, sticky with glue, resting on my shoulder as he'd say, "Don't do it fast, Ava. Do it right." I looked out the window. Clara and Ethan were walking out together under one umbrella. I smiled, not the bitter kind, the kind you give when you already know how the story ends. "Some people inherit the company," I whispered. "Some just inherit the consequences." Then I turned off the lights and locked the workshop door. The soft click of metal echoed in the dark, like the last heartbeat of an old creature getting ready to wake again. Thursday morning, exactly 20 years since the day I started at Weston Leatherworks, I got an email. Subject line, "Quick sync with HR, 9:00 a.m. No greeting, no happy anniversary. 20 years, and they still didn't know I take my coffee black and hate being called miss in emails. Just 8 words, cold, impersonal, like a notice that the power was being cut. I took a sip of coffee, staring at the line for a long while. After 2 decades here, I'd learned one thing. Meetings labeled quick never end quickly. I brought my inspection notebook, assuming they wanted to talk about the plant relocation or maintenance planning. Why not? I was still the only person in the entire building who knew where the main breaker was. The meeting was upstairs, what they now called the innovation wing. White walls, concrete floor, fake plants in real pots. On the table sat a water bottle with the new label, Weston, Reinventing Tradition. I smiled. If there were an award for hypocrisy, they'd take home the gold. 2 people were already there. Clara, beige suit, Mont Blanc pen, polished composure, and Megan, the freshly hired HR rep, was looking at me with that uneasy sympathy of someone about to do something they don't want to, or don't have the power to refuse. "Ava, thank you for coming," Clara said, her tone smooth as synthetic silk. This won't take long. Fine by me, I replied. I like things brief. She inhaled, then delivered the line every long-timer dreads, no matter how much they see it coming. We're going in a new direction. I nodded, slowly, taking another sip of coffee. Good. Just make sure that the direction includes paying the electric bill on time. Megan choked on a laugh. Clara didn't. She slid a folder across the table, thick paper, sealed in an envelope with the company logo. This is your severance package. 3 months' pay and insurance through the end of the quarter. I hope you understand. It's part of our restructuring strategy. I opened it. On top, bold letters read, Severance Agreement, Employee, Ava Morales. I chuckled. 2 decades of keeping this place from collapsing, and they still couldn't spell my name right. Z, huh? I said. Must be the upgraded version of me. Silence. Clara extended her hand, smiling that polite, empty smile. I'll need your ID badge and keys, Ava. I looked at her for a moment. 20 years of memories flashed through my head. The blackouts I fixed, the floods I mopped up, the late nights when younger workers called me Miss Ava with genuine gratitude. I reached into my bag and pulled out the brass keyring, 14 keys, each tagged with my own handwriting from 2004. I set them down on the table. The metal clinked, a heavy, echoing sound, like the end of something solid. I met Clara's eyes, my voice calm, almost detached. You sure about this? These keys don't just open doors. She froze for half a second. Sorry? Nothing, I said with a shrug. You'll find out. Megan tried to sound professional, her hands trembling slightly as she pushed the folder toward me. I just need you to sign here to confirm you've returned company property. I signed with one clean stroke, folded the paper, and slipped it into my pocket. I'll keep a copy. For the memories. No one said a word. No thank you. No handshake. No cake. For 20 years. I guess the gratitude budget got cut along with the power bill. Only Clara's eyes met mine. Cold, distant, blank as glass after the rain. I stood up. Well, I said, buttoning my coat. That's the most memorable anniversary I've ever had. I closed the door behind me. The automatic lock clicked, a slow, lonely applause. The hallway was empty. The smell of leather drifted up from the shop floor, carrying 20 years of my life with it. I paused by the window and looked down. Luis was at the cutting table. He looked up, met my eyes. I nodded once. He understood. Real workers always do. No words needed. I walked to the parking lot with nothing but my canvas bag and my old notebook. Inside, tucked between yellowed pages, was a photo from my first year at Weston. The whole team around the cutting table, hands sticky with glue, laughing. No one talked about stocks. No one talked about robots. I ran my finger over the photo. They said I was outdated, I murmured, half amused, half bitter. Funny. Even decency has an expiration date now. I got into the car and glanced back at the building through the rearview mirror. The new logo gleamed on the roof. Weston Future Lab. The word future flickered. Half lit, half dead. I laughed softly. Fitting, I said. Even their future can't keep the lights on. I started the engine. The radio crackled to life. Miles Davis, blue and green. The trumpet sounded weary, but steady, just like me. And as the car rolled forward, 20 years closed behind me without fireworks, without cake, just one woman walking away from the building she'd kept alive. But the funny thing was, I didn't feel defeated. I felt lighter, because I knew, when they push out the pillar, the building always tilts on its own. That night, the air was cold and dry. I drove home to the red brick house at the end of the street, the one with the window always cracked open so the smell of leather and old coffee could drift out. Pepper, my gray mutt, was curled up on the porch, lifting his head when he heard the car. Hey, old friend, I said, bending down to rub his ears. He snorted, then lay back down, as if tired from watching people disappoint each other all day. Inside, the soft yellow lamplight fell across old shoe prototypes, technical notebooks, and sticky notes scattered around the window frame. Don't forget to release the steam valve before sealing. A habit. I wasn't sure who I wrote it for. Maybe just to remind myself I still knew how to do something right. I made a cup of mint tea, set it beside a pile of unsorted papers, and sat down in the wooden chair. The night wind slipped through the cracks in the door, carrying in the scent of dry leather and oak. In that silence, I noticed something I hadn't heard in years: the sound of my own breathing. Beneath the window, by the oak cabinet my father built, sat an old mail chest. I'd kept it, because inside were things people usually forget, but I never did: contracts, letters, the first production sketches. I pulled it open. The wood creaked softly, and a wave of old paper and varnish filled the air. At the bottom lay a yellow envelope, handwriting faded. From Walter, 2003. I froze for a second. Walter Weston, the founder. Clara's father. He was one of those rare types: sharp mind, honest heart. He used to carry a little leather notebook, pages full of production notes and half-formed ideas. I remembered the first day I met him. He held out a glue-stained hand and smiled. "This lease is just until we get on our feet, Ava. You keep the place running. We'll build something worth keeping." And I believed him. For 20 years, I kept that promise, even after they forgot. I opened the envelope. Inside was the original factory lease from 2003, signed by Walter and me. Back then, he'd asked me to co-sign the lease as a technical co-founder, so the workshop would stay separate from his personal assets. I'd nearly forgotten all about it. On the second page, in tiny print at the bottom corner, it read, Clause 7B. Failure to renew within 30 days of expiry will result in automatic reversion of property rights to leaseholder. I blinked. Leaseholder, that was me. I glanced at the calendar on the wall. The 31st had passed, 3 days ago. I set my cup down, my palms suddenly warm. I read the line again, slower this time. Failure to renew within 30 days. A smile crept up, half disbelief, half recognition, like hearing the ending of a song I'd loved and forgotten. I stood, went to the file cabinet, and pulled the newer contracts. None of them mentioned renewal, no signatures, no extensions, which meant, on paper, the workshop still belonged to me. I laughed softly and looked at Pepper. "They wanted my keys," I said. "Turns out I still own the lock." He raised his head, ears drooping, as if sensing the air had just shifted. I sat down on the floor, spreading the papers out in a neat row. Every line was a pulse from the past: faded signatures, smudged red stamps, an old coffee ring in the corner. I'd kept everything, not out of paranoia, but habit. The kind of habit you form when you know that without proof, your work can vanish like dust. I reached for another envelope, Walter's handwriting again, round and steady. Just a few handwritten lines. "You do good work, Ava, because that's who you are. Don't let the new world convince you that integrity is outdated." I exhaled, a strange laugh slipping out, part disbelief, part awakening. Integrity is outdated. That was exactly what Clara said last year, when I refused to use cheap synthetic leather. Now, looking around my old workspace, bathed in warm lamplight, I realized every object here was proof that decency never goes out of style. I opened my old laptop, plugged in the hard drive, and pulled up the maintenance files, blueprints, and factory photos. Everything perfectly archived: monthly backups, quarterly prints. Clara used to mock me. "We live in the cloud, Ava. Who still prints paper?" And I'd tell her, "People who know clouds can disappear." Now I looked at the stack of folders beside me and smiled. Sometimes what they call outdated is what keeps you alive. The clock read 11:47 p.m. I poured another cup of tea, sat down, and wrote a few lines in my notebook. Clause 7B. Effective since March 2003. Renewal. Due Feb 28. Not renewed. Ownership reverts. 3 simple lines. Steady, like a heartbeat slowing after a storm. I folded the contract, sealed it in a new envelope, and wrote in red ink across the front, "The box under the window." Pepper stretched, resting his head on my knee. I stroked his fur and whispered, "Maybe I don't work for them anymore, but tomorrow, they'll be working in my house." Then I turned on the desk lamp, setting Walter's note beside the envelope, letting the golden light wash over his fading words. Outside, the wind brushed past the window, carrying the faint scent of dry leather and night air. I took a sip of tea and looked out. In the dark glass, I saw my reflection, tired but sharper than ever. A slow smile formed, thin but certain. "You wanted the future, Clara," I murmured. Well, the past just signed its comeback. The morning in Maple Ridge was veiled in thin mist. Sunlight crept through fogged windows, scattering soft reflections across the glass. The corner cafe, Hollow Roast, was open as usual, the faint hum of jazz spilling from its old speakers. The smell of espresso, mixed with burnt oak, reminded me of the workshop, back when leather and coffee shared the same scent of honest work. I sat by the window, stirring my coffee slowly, watching dust motes dance in the light. It had been over a week since that anniversary meeting. A week to read, annotate, and cross-check every clause. And just 3 days to realize that sometimes justice doesn't need to shout. It only needs the right font, the right date, and the right signature. The doorbell chimed softly. Marisol Vega walked in. Black pencil skirt, hair neatly tied, heels tapping lightly against the wooden floor. She smiled when she saw me, a smile both youthful and sharp. 12 years ago, she was that clumsy 18-year-old apprentice I'd taught to sew her first leather seam. Now she was an attorney, real estate and labor law. "Ms. Ava," she said, voice carrying equal parts warmth and respect. "Long time no see." I nodded, motioning for her to sit. "Still a mocha drinker?" "Americano now, less sugar," she laughed. "The world moves fast." "Not contracts," I said, sipping my coffee. I handed her a neatly clipped stack of papers. Lease, 2003, Clause 7B. No renewal, no name transfer, no re-registration. She read in silence for a few minutes, eyes narrowing slightly before lifting her gaze. "You're serious? They never changed the leaseholder's name?" "No. The only thing they changed was who got thanked at the Christmas party." Marisol laughed, a quiet, delighted laugh, the kind you give when irony feels too perfect to be real. "Then legally, you're still the primary leaseholder." "Exactly. And if the contract isn't renewed within 30 days of expiration, the property and all structures revert to the leaseholder," I finished. Clause 7B, line 8. She leaned back, eyes gleaming. "What are you planning to do, Ava?" "Nothing dramatic," I said. "Just following the procedure." Marisol chuckled. "You've still got it." "They call me outdated," I said, smirking. "Good thing the law doesn't follow trends." I took out an old silver Parker pen, its nib worn thin over time. Walter gave it to me in 2005, along with a note. "When you sign, make sure it means something." I placed it beside the notice of lease termination Marisol had printed, thick paper, dark blue ink, and a blank line between two names. The smallest space, but the most expensive one I'd ever filled. "You're sure?" she asked, her voice half professional, half emotional. "I'm just restoring order," I said. "They fired me from the company, but they're still working in my building. Call it an administrative inconvenience if you like." We both signed. The sound of the pen on paper was clean, final, like the end of a song that's lingered too long. Marisol folded the papers carefully into an envelope. "I'll have it notarized and filed with the county office today." "Thank you, Marisol," she smiled. "You once taught me that every stitch leaves a mark. I guess you're doing the same thing now, just with documents instead of a thread." I nodded, smiling softly. Leather, paper, contracts, different materials, same rule, don't let the seam break. When she stood to leave, I watched her walk, steady, confident, carrying the quiet strength I'd always hoped the next generation would have. Maybe not all the young ones were like Clara. Some still understood the value of doing things right, carefully, honestly. Marisol turned, envelope in hand. "Do you want me to send it today? The sooner the better," I said. "I hear they're updating the sign outside the factory. It'd be a shame if they missed the timing." We both laughed, a soft laugh, deep and clear, like cool water running through a desert. When I stepped out of the cafe, the sun was higher now, light glinting off my coffee cup as steam curled like mist. A group of workers passed by, paint on their shirts, sandwiches in hand, laughing about lunch breaks. And it struck me, maybe justice really is simple. It just needs someone ordinary, persistent, and done being underestimated. I stopped by the door, touching the envelope in my coat pocket, the notice of lease termination. In the corner, blue ink shimmered under the sunlight, the thin Parker line sharp and precise. I traced it gently, whispering, "They fired me for being too traditional, so I used tradition to fire them." A morning breeze passed, rustling the receipt in my hand. Above me, sunlight bounced off the cafe window, catching the blue ink, making it glimmer like fate's quiet smile. I walked down the sidewalk, my old black shoes tapping softly against the stone. Pepper would be waiting at home, and I could already picture him tilting his head, asking with his eyes, "Another long day?" But today didn't feel long. It felt bright. I knew the game wasn't over, but this time I wasn't a piece on their board anymore. I was the one holding the pen, and this time I knew exactly where to sign. Monday morning, 8:05. Sunlight streamed through the frosted glass of the leather workshop, reflecting off the polished concrete floor. Clara Weston, dressed in a crisp white linen dress, stood perfectly framed in front of the live stream camera, her smile adjusted to pixel precision, like something cut straight out of Photoshop. Behind her, a massive banner read, "Weston Fall Collection, Tradition Reimagined." The cameras rolled, marketing staff circled around her, eyes glued to their phone screens, the ring light shining in their pupils like part of a sacred tech ritual. The air was thick with perfume and ambition. Clara lifted a pair of caramel leather shoes toward the lens. "Every stitch tells a story," she said, her voice confident, her eyes glowing. I nearly laughed. If I hadn't known that in a few minutes, she'd be telling a very different story. Outside the glass doors, a gray truck pulled up. On the side, the seal of Redwood County, Department of Civil Enforcement. Two officers stepped out, each holding a large sheet of paper mounted on cardboard, printed at the top in bright red, "Notice to vacate, 72 hours. Failure to comply will result in legal enforcement of property reversion under Lease Clause 7B. One officer walked to the main entrance, peeled the tape, and smoothed the notice right over the brand new company logo, Weston Future Lab. The sound of the tape, sharp and final, cut through the air like a gavel striking in court. Inside, the marketing team was filming a close-up of the shoes. The lighting glowed, everything flawless, until someone heard a knock. No one paid attention, thinking it was a worker. But when the camera panned toward the door, the white paper with red letters came into full view in the frame. "What's that?" the camera woman blurted. Clara kept talking, unaware. Only when a young staffer shouted, Clara? Someone's posting a court notice on the door," did her smile falter, frozen mid-breath, lips curved, eyes petrified. The live stream kept going. Over 2,000 people were watching. The comments exploded. "Is that a court notice? Did they just get evicted? OMG. Hashtag leather drama is wild today." A young factory worker in the corner pulled out his phone and recorded from afar. He captioned it, POV. "The boss just got evicted mid-live stream." Within an hour, it hit 300,000 views. Megan, the head of HR, rushed to the door, face pale. "I'm sorry, what's going on?" One of the officers handed her the paperwork. Official notice, per the 2003 lease agreement. "The property owner has requested reversion. You have 72 hours to vacate." "Property owner? Who is that?" she stammered. "Gregory Monroe," he read from an old copy, then paused, glancing at the updated signature below. Signed, Ava Morales. Megan blinked. "Ava, as in the one they fired last week?" The room fell silent. Clara turned towards Ethan, her boyfriend, the so-called tech consultant, his face white as chalk. "You said you checked the contract." I thought it was renewed," he stuttered. "You thought?" Her voice cracked. sharp as a snapped guitar string. The camera operator fumbled to shut down the stream. Too late. Viewers had already clipped the moment, adding a soundtrack of Another One Bites the Dust over the shot of the notice being taped to the glass. Leather drama spread like wildfire. 2 million views in 24 hours. Comments poured in. Corporate karma hits hard. She fired the woman who owned the lease, the most stylish eviction ever. Across town, I was in my small kitchen, pouring mint tea. Pepper lay at my feet, tail thumping softly whenever he heard the kettle whistle. On my laptop screen, the #leather drama clip replayed on loop, subtitles blaring. Live. Weston. Leatherworks gets eviction notice midstream. I watched Clara frozen in front of the door, her face ghost pale under the ring light. I stirred my tea, smiling faintly. Guess I finally made it into their social media strategy. A message popped up from Marisol. Viral in under 6 hours. You owe me coffee. I typed back, make it 2. You just saved tradition twice. I switched to the local newsfeed. The anchor's voice carried the giddy tone of a sports commentator. The company has been ordered to vacate within 72 hours after discovering that the property lease still belongs to former chief engineer Eva Morales. Outside the factory, a reporter called out, Ms. Weston, is it true the lease was never renewed? Clara gripped her purse, forcing a smile that barely held. We're handling it, she said, voice trembling. I leaned back in my chair, tea in hand, gazing out the window. A light breeze drifted through, carrying the scent of mint and sunlight. I murmured to myself, the algorithm finally did something right. Pepper lifted his head, eyes round and curious, as if asking, So, it's over? Not yet, I said, scratching his ear. But almost. By noon, #leather drama had climbed to the top of trending. Someone posted a meme of me sipping tea with the caption, She brewed revenge and mint tea at the same time. Another comment read, I've never seen karma run this efficiently. And one more. She didn't yell. She didn't sue. She just filed. I laughed. For once, the internet got the story right. That afternoon, Marisol called. You okay? I'm fine, I said calmly. They're the ones who will need new storage soon. The press is calling it the classiest eviction in county history. Let's not exaggerate, I said. I just followed the law. Having taste helps, but paperwork wins. Marisol laughed through the phone. You know, your clip's making people recheck their leases. You might have started a movement, Lease Awareness Month, I chuckled. Maybe I should print the shirts. By sunset, I shut the laptop and turned on my old radio. Miles Davis again. So what? The trumpet floated, lazy and unbothered, perfectly sarcastic. I leaned back, shoulders softening. No loud revenge, just timing, silence, and the law. They fired me for being too traditional. I took one last sip of tea, a slow smile spreading across my face. So I used tradition to fire them. The final rays of sunlight hit the rim of my mug, glinting like the universe nodding back. Justice served, with mint and silence. Afternoon light streamed through the kitchen window, glinting off the pair of leather shoes I was polishing. Dark brown, slightly worn at the heel, but still soft and warm, like the hands of someone who respects their craft. Pepper lay at my feet, breathing slowly, unconcerned with the world burning outside. The phone buzzed. Unknown number. The old office area code. I wiped my hands dry and answered. Hello? Silence for a few seconds. Then a trembling voice came through, trying to sound composed, but I knew that panicked tone too well. The sound of someone who's lost control. You can't do this, Ava, I smiled. Good afternoon, Clara. Don't you use that tone with me. Do you have any idea we're in the middle of our product launch? You're destroying a 20-year brand. I set the cloth down on the counter, calm. Oh, I didn't. The lease did. She went quiet for a beat. I could almost picture her face, trying to decide what exactly had beaten her, the law, bad luck, or karma. Then her voice flared. You blindsided us, Ava. This is petty. It's vindictive. No, I cut in, voice even, sharp as a fine blade. I just stopped carrying your weight quietly, silence. A long, ragged exhale on the other end. Anger or despair, I couldn't tell. Do you have any idea how much this is costing us? Clara's voice cracked. Investors are threatening to pull out, the press is everywhere, and my legal team. I lifted my mint tea, took a sip. That's rough. First time learning what accountability feels like? Ava, I'm trying to save my father's company. Her tone softened, tired now. He used to say you were a good person. I want to believe that. I gave a faint smile. Your father also told me I could trust him. Then he forgot to renew the lease. She froze. We can work something out. What do you want? Money? Recognition? I can pay. I chuckled. Clara, if I wanted money, I wouldn't have chosen this line of work. And as for recognition, you couldn't afford it. A long pause. The faint hum of her air conditioner buzzed in my ear. Outside, the light turned amber, Pepper's shadow stretching across the wooden floor. What do you want, Ava? She asked, voice smaller now, almost pleading. I looked out the window. A flock of birds crossed the sky, forming an arrow. I thought for a moment, then spoke softly, my words steady as freshly poured tea. I just want you to remember, every company, no matter how big, stands on the backs of the small people you thought were replaceable. So that's the lesson? She snapped. No. That's the invoice. I heard a sharp breath on the other end. She was scrambling to sound composed again. Fine, I'll call my lawyer. You think you've won? I smiled, light as a breeze. It's not me who thinks. The paperwork does. She held her breath for a moment, then nearly whispered, You're being cruel, Ava. I laughed, soft but precise. No, Clara. I'm just being accurate. Cruel is firing the one person who kept your building from falling apart and calling it innovation. Another pause, then her voice dropped, searching for mercy. If my father were still alive, he'd never let this happen. If he were still alive, I said, he'd understand that I'm only finishing what he forgot. I stood, carrying the polished shoes to the porch where the fading light brushed their worn leather grain. She was still on the line, breathing hard, typing in the background. You'll regret pulling me down like this, she hissed. I laughed, a real, genuine laugh. You're mistaken, Clara. I didn't pull you down. I just let go of the ladder you were climbing on my back. Ava. Next time, read the fine print. It's cheaper than therapy. I hung up. The click echoed clean and sweet, like a lock turning perfectly into place. Pepper looked up, wagging his tail. I knelt, stroking his head. We don't need to win big, I said softly. Just clean. I set the phone on the table. The screen still glowed with a new message from Marisol. Court confirmed. They're vacating. I smiled, poured more tea, and let the steam blur the glass. Outside, the sounds of cars, voices, and wind blended into a quiet, jazzy rhythm. I looked at the shoes in my hands. The stitches still straight, the leather gleaming faintly under the warm light. 20 years, no raises, no praise, but every stitch right where it belonged. They had all the awards, the cameras, the live streams, yet none of them bothered to read a single line at the bottom of a contract. That's not karma. That's precision. The thing they lost long ago. I brushed the dust away one last time and hung the shoes on the rack. Beneath them, the notice of lease termination rested neatly in its leather folder, blue ink still sharp and clean. Perfect. Precise. My final piece of craftsmanship. The afternoon light softened. On the radio, a woman's smoky voice sang an old love song. I closed my eyes, listening to the quiet rhythm of a perfect ending. They said I was outdated, I whispered. Turns out, some things age beautifully. 3 months later, the red brick building that once bore the name Weston Future Lab now only reads Lab. The word future had come down, along with the dreams they'd borrowed and never paid for. Clara vanished from the media, investors pulled out, and the website went dark. The news called it the collapse of a legacy brand. I just saw it as the natural ending of something built on arrogance. A new sign went up, white letters on brown wood, Evermore Craft Collective, and beneath it, in smaller print, made by hands that care. I stood on the sidewalk looking at it, feeling something strange, like seeing myself rewritten, but in a younger, brighter hand. The workshop doors opened. The smell of real leather and polish drifted out, mixed with the scent of coffee from the corner table. I stepped inside. The sewing machines hummed, steady, round, honest. A familiar voice called out, "Ava?" I turned. Luis, now in a crisp shirt, hair tied back, name tag reading production manager. He smiled, the same as 10 years ago, only now with the quiet confidence of someone who knows the worth of his own hands. He handed me a cup. "I heard you might stop by. We kept your recipe. Black, no sugar." I laughed. Strange. It's been years since anyone remembered that. We walked along the cutting tables. Golden afternoon light poured through the windows, touching rows of leather hanging on the walls. No glossy posters, no slogans about innovation, only a small chalkboard that read, "Do it right or don't do it at all." I stopped short. That was my father's saying. Luis noticed and smiled. "We kept it from the old shop. You wrote it with a black marker on the whiteboard, remember?" I thought they erased it with the old nameplate. "No one dared," he said softly. "It's still our rule of production." We stopped at the drying area, the place where I'd spent years bent over long tables. Now it was brighter, cleaner, but the spirit felt the same. Luis pointed to a wooden plaque on the wall, newly carved, built by hands, guided by integrity. I ran my fingers over the letters, the wood still fresh, the paint not fully dry. "It's beautiful," I whispered. "I just made sure it stayed standing." Luis shook his head. "No, Ava. You built it. We're just making sure it keeps breathing." I sat in the old metal chair by the window, the same one I used to sit on, checking every stitch by hand. The afternoon light slanted through the air, dust swirling like memories half awake. I pulled an old envelope from my coat pocket, Walter's letter. The edges were worn, the paper yellowed, but the ink still clear. I read it again, for the 100th time, but this time it felt different. "May everything you build with your hands outlast our signatures." I smiled, a tear rolling down my finger, my voice steady. "Looks like this one did." Luis stood beside me, silent. He said nothing, just poured more coffee and set it down. Outside, the sewing machines kept their rhythm, the heartbeat of a place once pronounced dead. "Will you reopen a workshop?" he asked. I shook my head. "No, I don't need to. You already did." He smiled, voice thick with emotion. "But your name should be somewhere, at least on the wall." I pointed toward the window, where the sign swayed gently in the wind, made by hands that care. "That's enough." We stepped out onto the porch. Late autumn sunlight, soft and gold, carried the scent of fresh leather and mint from the cafe down the street. A group of young trainees passed by, sketches in hand, laughing loudly. Luis watched them, proud, a little anxious. "The new generation," he said. "They move too fast sometimes." "They'll learn," I said, "as long as someone reminds them. Doing it right never goes out of style." Before leaving, I turned to look at the building one last time. The bricks were still the same, but the light on them was new. And I realized, some creations don't need their maker's name, only their maker's values. I stepped down the stairs. Pepper ran from across the street, tail wagging. I bent down, stroked his head, and whispered, "We're done, old friend. Not victorious, just done." That night at home, I rehung an old photograph on the wall. Our first year at Weston, everyone smiling, glue on their hands, not a smartwatch in sight. Beneath it, I framed Walter's letter beside the brass key that once opened the factory. On the edge of the frame, I etched a single line in silver ink: "Integrity doesn't retire." Then I sat back and turned on the old radio. Miles Davis again, "Autumn Leaves." The trumpet soft, tired, and beautiful, like the last light of day. I leaned my head back and closed my eyes. Outside, the wind carried the scent of new leather from the old shop, mingling with the mint on my table, a chapter closed. No bitterness, no pride, just peace. "You built this place, Ava," Luis had said. No, I whispered, smiling. I just made sure it could stand. And for the first time in 20 years, I let the music finish without replaying it. 3 months later, at the end of Maple Street, the red brick house had a new wooden sign. Hand-carved letters, slightly slanted but steady. Morales and Craft, production consulting and leatherwork training. No lights, no glossy slogan, just plain wood and the faint scent of real leather carried by the breeze. Inside, the room was softly lit. An oak table, a pot of mint tea, Pepper curled up beneath the chair, loyal as ever. On the wall hung a single item, the old brass key from 2003, the one that once opened every door at Weston Leatherworks. It was scratched and tarnished, but the metal still shone faintly where my thumb used to rest. Right beneath it, I'd written in white chalk, "The craft never ages, only people forget it." The morning passed quietly. I poured a cup of black coffee, sat at the table, and opened my notebook. The first page listed my new trainees. 8 names, all different ages. A young woman who'd just quit the factory, a college student studying engineering, a middle-aged accountant who said she wanted to make something real again. At the top of the page, I wrote one more line. Rule number 1. The hands remember before the mind does. The door opened. A young woman stepped in, hair tied high, carrying a roll of fresh brown leather. "You're Ms. Ava, right?" I nodded. "I heard you teach hand stitching. No machines, no software." I smiled. "That's right, because sometimes what needs mending isn't the shoe, it's trust." She laughed, not fully getting it yet, but her eyes lit up. I pointed to the table. "Let's begin. Lay the leather down and see what story it wants to tell you." By noon, sunlight streamed through the window, coating the room in gold. I sat polishing my old shoes, the same pair I wore the day I was fired. The scuff on the toe was still there. I'd never bothered to remove it. Even the toughest things deserve one scar, a reminder of how they endured. On the radio, Miles Davis played Autumn Leaves. The trumpet sounded tired, but beautiful. Pepper shifted and sighed as if he too understood. Sometimes peace is the greatest reward. Later that afternoon, Louis stopped by. He brought a small bouquet and a note that read, "To the woman who taught leather how to breathe." I laughed, shaking my head. "It should say the woman who kept it breathing." He grinned sheepishly. "We still tell the new apprentices about you. They don't believe the woman once called outdated is the reason the workshop still exists." I took a sip of tea. "Outdated," I said. "That's just a label people use for things they never took the time to understand." After Luis left, I stood before the wall. The sunset light hit the brass key, glowing faintly, like a heartbeat made of memory. I thought of Walter, glue on his fingers, that kind smile. Only when it's made with honesty does what we build truly last. 20 years. So many people, so many hands. But I was still here, and decency still had a place to live. I opened my notebook and wrote the final line of the first chapter of Morales and Craft. They called me outdated. But when the hands that built stop working, the whole brand collapses. I didn't destroy what I made. I just took it back. I closed the notebook and set it beside my half-finished tea. The last light of day spilled across the table, warm, quiet, forgiving. Pepper stirred, half dreaming, as if chasing the ghosts of old days. I stood and turned off the light. The room dimmed into the soft amber of dusk. Before leaving, I looked back once more. The key still gleamed, simple, real, asking for no applause. I smiled, whispering, "That's enough." If you've ever been underestimated, called outdated, or quietly replaced, this story is for you. Tell me where you're listening from, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like Ava's.